According to Roman historians, the Druids were superstitious people who practiced sacrifices all wrong, and they did everything incorrect. Primitive, ignorant people. But were they really? Let's take a journey back through time, back through ancient days, long before anyone had ever heard of Christianity or the Abrahamic religions. And let's go back to a time when Druids, they were entrusted with all of the sacred traditions. It's important to remember that in the old days when the Druids were around, everybody used the lunar calendar. The solar calendar would have been seen as a terrible innovation because it disconnects you from nature. When you're on the lunar calendar, not only are you synced up with the zodiac, but you're completely synced up with the phases of the moon. So what that means is all the Druid holidays were always celebrated on either a new moon or a full moon, and it would always correspond to the same days on the calendar. And this is why we have holidays at all. And this is also the reason why the old Celtic holidays don't work today on the solar calendar. The days are always off. May Day and Halloween don't necessarily fall on a new moon or a full moon, which is a problem. Let's take a look at what the Druids would actually do on a holiday. It's the month of May, and food supplies from winter are running low. The stores are almost empty. The Druids have been carefully monitoring the weather. The full moon is coming up in just a few days, and careful preparations are being made. All of the seeds that were collected from last year are now getting organized because certain seeds can be planted under the full moon and certain seeds should be planted under the new moon. And the Druids and the wise women who have held on to all of the traditional knowledge understand which ones need to be planted when. The soil is being prepared for planting, and it is now the night of the full moon. Everybody in the village is gathered, a celebration is in order, and an animal sacrifice is needed. In fact, usually multiple animal sacrifices. So 9 animals have been gathered to be sacrificed. Large fires are made. These are called bone fires, not bonfires. The original word bonfire actually comes from the word bone fire. And we'll get into why in just a minute. The animals are carefully prepared and sacrificed. Their throats are slit. The blood is collected into a sacrificial bowl. Parts of the animal entrails are burned. The rest of the meat is cut up and shared amongst the tribe. The carcass and the bones is then burned, and this is where you get the term bone fire. The bones are now burning in the fire. The villagers then take all the seeds, and as they plant the seeds, the Druids take a ladle of blood and they pour it over each seed. But then a prayer is made. A prayer is made to the gods for rain, for a good harvest, all of the wishes and hopes of the village for that summer. All of it goes into that seed when they plant it. After the fire has died down and the bones are completely dried out, they would be crushed up and they also would be spread over the seeds. Ashes from the fire are also collected and spread over the seeds. And these ashes consist of wood ash, but also some of the animal carcass and the animal entrails that were burned as well. And this animal sacrifice ritual could be done again during midsummer, when now the plants were actually growing, and they once again would ladle blood around each plant and sprinkle bone meal. This would also be accompanied by singing. Certain songs would be played in very specific modes because plants actually grow better under certain kinds of music. So it should be pretty clear at this point what I'm describing to you. All of these things are still used in farming today. Bone meal, blood meal, potash. They plant under the full moon or the new moon because the tidal effect actually raises the water table and increases soil moisture. How's that for superstition? If you failed to do any of these key details, your whole village would die. If you failed to collect the blood or the bones, if you failed to plant under new moon or full moon, if you failed any of these vital preparations, you would not survive. The Druids were the key to survival. And this is where religious rites really come from. The attention to detail. Everything has to be done right. Specific hymns and songs must be used for the plants to grow properly. This is not up for debate. It was used for tens of thousands of years of trial and error to arrive at the correct practices. And all of that could be lost in a generation if somebody tried to innovate the system who didn't understand what they were doing, right? Some academic from the big city comes in with all of these new ideas and ruins everything. That's what can happen. The other thing the Druids would do that they were deeply criticized for is having an animal sacrifice under a sacred tree. This was a big issue for the Christians. They were absolutely horrified by this practice. And the reason this is done is because trees actually feed on us, just as we feed on them. They need blood. They need carcasses that they can break down and turn into soil. The soil is sacred. We're living in a time today when we're rapidly destroying the soil thanks to modern agriculture and these big factory farms and big companies who are destroying the soil, which a lot of people don't know this, but there are millions of microorganisms that live in that soil. Soil is actually a living being. And this was all understood by the Druids, all of this. The sacred oak trees help to maintain the structure of the soil. They pull nutrients from deep down and they bring them up to the surface. So they actually help create the soil. And they have to be blessed and sanctified with blood offerings. That's what makes it holy. There's nothing superstitious about that. Now, the urban societies, on the other hand, they were superstitious. They had lost touch with nature. They were now living in cities. They had forgotten why they did things a certain way. Their sacrifices had become meaningless. So say when they sacrifice an animal, where does the blood go? It's wasted. They don't use it for anything because they're in the city. There's no soil to consecrate. Finally, the Romans would innovate of just burning the animal whole. They would just walk an animal into the fire, and they thought that the gods were eating the animal through the fire. So the fire was kind of like a magical portal where the gods would consume the animal. Their prayers had become just wishes and begging for things from the gods. There was no longer any connection to nature with this stuff. So it really did become superstitious. They were the ones who were using magical thinking, not the Druids. See, everything the Romans accused the Druids of doing, they themselves did. They were the ones who had the superstitious ideas, who had lost touch with nature. The Romans were the ones who practiced human sacrifice in the Colosseum and in other areas, not the Druids. So we have to go back and kind of look at history through a different lens and get outside of the Roman-centric version of history. The Romans were a step backwards for Europeans, not a step forward. They were spiritually retarded. And that's why Christianity took off in the Roman Empire. And it would have never spread in Europe if the Romans hadn't hunted down the Druids first and destroyed the spiritual guardians of Europe. And then they switched over to a solar calendar too, which meant that all of the holidays now no longer matched up with the proper days. So all of these Roman innovations they really destroyed paganism more than anybody. The fact that paganism was dying out, say, around 1000 AD, is a direct consequence of the Roman Empire. Even if Christianity hadn't came out, paganism still would have been seriously messed up because of the damage the Romans did to the Druids. They were killing the Druids, and all their superstitious innovations, getting you over to a solar calendar, getting you to burn animals instead of collecting the blood and fertilizing the earth with it, telling you that planting under a full moon or a new moon was superstitious. Today, thanks to modern science, we are rediscovering some of these things. Some of what was considered to be superstition is now scientific fact, and we're starting to understand that. But it really shines a new light on history when you realize the tragedy of ignorant, superstitious Romans, Roman Christians particularly, hunting down the ancestral wisdom and actually destroying it.